story, but one time he introduced me to Melania, and he said, meet Melania. And I said, hi, pleasure to meet you. And he said, no, look at her. And I said, I did look at her, and I was happy to meet her. He goes, no, look at her up and down. I'm like, I'm not doing that, it's your wife. He goes, do it. So I look her up and down, he goes, all real. I think he was probably right. One time I was in his office, and he said, look at this, and he threw down a yellow little card he'd gotten from McDonald's. And he said, this allows me to eat at any McDonald's in the entire world for free. Only 3 people in the world have this, Michael Jordan, Mother Teresa, and me. And I'm like, how am I going to check this, Donald? He goes, I'm telling you, it's the truth. And I'm like, when are you going to use this? Like, you're behind some guy at the Beijing McDonald's, and you get up there and you're like, look, I'll have a Happy Meal and a chocolate shake and an apple pie. And some little guy will go, well, this will be 43 million won. And you're going to whip it out and go, not so fast, Hop Sing, this is on you. Some of the crazy stuff he does. He's a lot of fun, but he's crazy. And I was reminded, is that an F-14, you think, right there?
Yeah, it's a ton.
Yeah, it's an F-14. So, one of the worst things I ever did as a sports writer was go up in an F-14. I thought thank you, sir. I thought it would be really exciting. I asked for a year to go up in an F-14 because Terrell Davis had done it and Elway had done it. And so I go and they finally said yes. So I went to a naval base in Virginia. And the night before, I met my captain. And his name was Chip Biff King. He had 2 cool nicknames, and he had this blue eyes and this chin you could crack a coconut on, you know. And I said, Commander Chip Biff, I get a little sick. Even on United, I get sick sometimes. Is there something I should eat in the morning before we go up so I don't get, too airsick? And he said, definitely eat bananas. And I said, why? And he said, because they taste the same coming down as they do going up. And so that next morning I was there, and I had my flight suit and they had my name on it, and I'm getting all my safety briefings, and I noticed everybody else in my squadron has got their little sign on there, their little call sign. Like the guy that gave me my safety briefing was Psycho. And so I said, Psycho, I tend to get a little air sick, like even on United. Is there something you got for me? And he said, yes, sir. And he gave me the 2 plastic Glad bags, these clear ones, the 13-ounce Ziploc. I'm like, really, Psycho? That's what you got? That's all I got, sir. But it really was the coolest 21 minutes of my life, and the ride lasted 83 minutes, and he was totally right about bananas. Oh my God, they were great. He didn't mention what the Chipotle burrito would taste like from the previous Thursday. And then pretty soon he's flying upside down at 600 miles an hour, and we're doing these turns, and I swear I saw a box of Milk Duds go by from Sacred Heart Elementary in Boulder. I threw up everything. He's doing air combat maneuvers upside down. I realize I'm the first guy to throw down, I think. It was terrible. I can't even look at that thing. And I remember I landed, I kissed the ground, and I was supposed to fly out that next day. I remember that afternoon, but I couldn't fly because I was too airsick. And so they said, they gave me another night in the hotel. And they said, keep your flight suit. And I think it's because I threw up all over it. And I took it home, and washed it 100 times. And then 2 weeks later, I got in the mail a little envelope, and I opened it up. It was from my squadron, and it was my call sign, 2 bags. If you're in the military, you can address me as 2 bags. I called John Elway tonight and said, how come you're not coming? And he said, I'm too busy, this and that, the season. So, could we all flip him off for this picture? Yeah, take that, Hammerhead. Beautiful. Flipped off by 700 guys. And it's pretty much all guys, right? Like, I haven't seen this many men since Ricky Martin's bridal shower. This is unbelievable. And by the way, it's the same old story, right? There's a long line in the men's room and no line at the women's room, just like Bronco games, right? That's ridiculous. I want to give a quick shout out to one of the bus boys. He's a good guy, good friend of mine, right in the back, Brock Osweiler. Brock! Thank you. Brock, you knew there'd be a price to pay, man. You knew there'd be a price to pay. I've been asked to quell some of these rumors about some fake news that's going around. This is not real. I know I've heard some out in the cigar area. It's not true that Caitlyn Jenner today won a mixed doubles tennis tournament by herself. That is not true. It's not true that the UC Health Center has come up with a drug for depressed lesbians, tricoxagen. That is not. It's not true.
That's why he asked.
It's not true. An empty limousine pulled up here tonight and Jay Cutler got out. That's not true. None of these things are true. I do want to. I love coming to this thing because I love men, and that maybe doesn't come out right. The truth is, if I can get serious for a second, I really had no dad in my life. I was a son of a drunk, and he was never around, and my mother was ill, and he didn't know where I was or care where I was, just wanted to know where his next drink was coming from. And so, I remember one night I came in at 6 o'clock, at the same time he was coming in, and I just never had that kind of guidance. And so, as Ed was saying, when I could always write. I won a contest in first grade, and I won the state high school some kind of contest, and that's how I got the job at the Boulder Camera. But I was just an out-of-control kid, as wild as my crazy hair, and so I was at CU, and I was getting all these bylines on the front page of the sports section, and a professor took me aside, a woman professor, and she said, "I think you're better than sports. I think you should try for more than sports. You're a better writer than sports, and you could do things that are important." And I didn't know. I didn't have anyone tell me anything. And so for a while, I started thinking that maybe she was right, because the people I was covering were athletes. And athletes make their living with their bodies more than their minds. No offense, Reggie. But a lot of them are not that bright. They're just used to using their mind. I'm always reminded of Marvin Barnes. Anybody remember Marvin Barnes? The great Providence. He was about 7'2", and he played great in college. Then he went into the pros, and he flunked out pretty quickly. And then he was living above a liquor store in Providence, Rhode Island. And he's really on hard times. He got busted on crack a bunch of times. And he decides one day that he's going to go down and rob the liquor store that's underneath him. So he puts on this is all true. He puts on a black ski mask, goes downstairs, pulls out the clock, points it at the cashier and says, "Give me all your money, this is a robbery." And the guy goes, "Marvin, what are you doing?" And Marvin goes, "It ain't me." This is the kind of people I had to cover. I don't know if you remember a guy named Otis Armstrong. Yeah. Otis one time told me, he said, "Hey, we got our backs to the driver's seat, so." I was like, I don't know what that means. I did Wayne Gretzky's book for him, and hockey guys are beautiful. And he got traded to the Kings. So we're up there at his house. Have you ever seen his house above Sherwood? It's way up on that hill, or was on top of that hill. And so he's got this house way on top of the hill, and a bunch of his Kings teammates are going to come see him, right? Edmonton Oilers teammates are going to see him for the first time in LA. And we're waiting up there, and Janet Jones looks great, and we're sitting there waiting for this car to make it up the long, steep driveway. And they get out and they go, "That's such a stupid buy, Gratz." Like, "Why is this a stupid buy?" He goes, and the guy goes, "You'll never get up this in the winter." Hockey guys. And the thing about athletes is when you're a writer, they don't really give you good quotes. They just say the same thing they've said 1,000 times. It's like there's a little book of what they say. So I started collecting sentences that I have never heard in 40 years of doing journalism and writing movies now. 40 years. I've never heard some of these sentences. And in fact, I realized these sentences have never been uttered in the history of the English language. These words have never been put in that order. For instance, Shaq, you shoot the technical. No one's ever said that sentence. Tiger, meet my sister. No one has ever. John Daly just got his 10-year chip. Let's celebrate. No, you don't hear these sentences. That was the problem with sports writing. You couldn't really become Hemingway in sports writing. But I did do. I've been asked to tell this story. I think I told it last time. The best thing I ever did, actually, in sports writing, had nothing to do with sports. I covered 6 times the Sports Illustrated swimsuit shoot. I wrote the article that nobody reads. Yes, you know, you've lived it, words, and you start going backwards. I wrote it in German once. No one cares, but it's the greatest assignment. And there's 2 people you got to meet if you ever go to the swimsuit shoot. I don't know why you guys would go, but maybe you'll go. I don't know. You got to meet this girl Alice, the breast wrangler, because she has the greatest job in the world. She's the breast wrangler. She comes in every 10 minutes because they're out of balance, or maybe the little veal. We call them veal cutlets. A lot of these, you're not going to want to hear this. They put the plastic veal cutlets in the bras and the tops, you know, to kind of make them peek up, you know. And Alice will come in about every 10 minutes. Oh, we're spritzing, and they spritz them. And oh, one's peeking out, and we got to do this. Oh, they're out of balance. And then she'd come back, and we'd be like, Alice, if you ever need a year off, I would like to take your job. But the guy you got to meet is Francois the Butt Duster. That's his name, Francois the Butt. We call him. He's this French gay guy. Who's a great guy, but he's the guy that gets to hold up the towel while they change because he's gay. And all the straight guys are back like this, and he's like, no, back, you animals. And we called him Francois the Butt Duster because he would take this little French feathery dustery thing and make so their bodies don't shine. And so it'd be like Tyra Banks and Brooklyn Decker, and you're like, holy sh**. And he's like, oh, Brooklyn, your skin is so parfait. You do not have any cellulite. Magnifique. And you're like, oh, okay. And then he'd do Tyra Banks, and then he'd do whoever. And you're like, ah. And you're always at some beach or some mountain or something. And then he'd hold up the towel, the giant beach towel, and they'd change. Sometimes 6 girls would be back there changing. And you could hear them like, can we change right in front of this guy? And then some of the older ones, Heidi Klum, would say something like, oh, it's Francois, he's gay, don't worry about it. And so then they'd come back out, and you'd like, you gotta go to beers afterwards with Francois the Butt Duster, because he ain't gay and he's not even French. He's got the greatest gig ever. His name's Frankie from Bergen Park, New Jersey. He's got 3 kids. It's just a big lie he's been telling all these years, and everybody's covered for him. You're like, Frankie, what is Brooklyn Decker like naked? Dude, you would chew through a wall, I'm telling you. So, I did a lot of stupid stuff as a sports writer. I remember, I wrote Boz's book. You remember Boz? I mean, Boz had never even read a book, much less wrote. And I write him this book, and we go to number 2 on the New York Times. And at that time, you know, I was in kind of a difficult marriage. And I was drinking 20 cups of coffee a day and 20 aspirin, and I was just a mess. And my stomach was blowing up, and I used to take these biofeedback classes where I would go down to Littleton. This lady would teach me how to relax my stomach, and you would take a breath every 30 seconds, right? And so you go like this. I won't do 30 seconds, but you come kind of like this. And you're supposed to spit out that last bit of breath at the end of 30 seconds and then take another 30-second breath. Well, anyway, so I'd written this book, Boz, and it was a big controversy. And he wrote about Buster Rhymes opening a machine gun over the quad, and a gang rape that had happened, and just awful things were in this book, which Boz swore were all true. So I put them in there, and then now it's come out, and now ESPN wants me on live television with Chris Berman, and I'm in my house in Littleton. I've never been on live television in my life. And so I'm sitting there in the chair, I got the thing in, my stomach going crazy, and the guy says, 2 more minutes, and you're on with Chris Berman live. And I'm like, oh shit, I got time for a couple of these breaths. So I'm in the middle of the second breath, and my 9-year-old son comes in and goes, Dad, what are you doing? You're on TV. Stop doing that. I guess my earpiece hadn't worked, and Chris Berman sees me sitting there and goes, so Mr. Reilly, or Rick Reilly, out in Littleton, is this book an indictment of Oklahoma football or college football in general? And I go, but Berman thinks I'm giving the greatest answer ever. Like, he thinks I'm going to say it's all made up, and Boz and I are lovers, and the whole thing was a lie. So he's waiting through a 30-second breath because he thinks I'm cleansing my soul. And then I go. So Berman goes, well, we know he's alive. We can see him breathing, and we'll come back later. So. So, like I said, I was a kid with no guidance, didn't really know what it was like to be a man, and I was just having fun. And then Columbine happened. And we lived right by Columbine, and I had 3 guys on my softball team. They had kids there. And if you remember, the girls' volleyball coach, Dave Sanders. You remember this guy? And he ran into the cafeteria and he got all 3 of my kids' buddies out, along with 200 kids out of the cafeteria. And instead of going with them to freedom, he turned back and ran up the stairs to try to clear kids out of the science wing. And he got shot in the back. He got dragged into that room. They barricaded the door. And Dave Sanders sat there lying, bleeding to death, while ambulances sat outside because they couldn't come in because they didn't know if the shooters were still alive. And kids, to try to keep Dave talking, they took off their sweatshirts to stance the bleeding and all that. And they started going through all the old yearbooks to show Dave, he'd been there 22 years, all the teams he'd coached. And remember her? You remember him? He coached practically every sport there. And I don't know, that just ripped a hole in me, that whole Columbine thing. And also I was so inspired by a guy like Dave Sanders to be that, to risk your lives because you're a man, and that's what men do, is go out there and get those kids that might have died otherwise. And I just decided from then on in, I was going to write stories about guys like that, because I realized at that point in my life, I had really been raised, not by my dad, but by men in sports. Like, do you remember Sox Walseth? He was just this great guy, and he was coaching the Lady Buffs. The first job I had was Lady Buffs, and I'm just tearing this program apart, and I'm ripping people, and he comes and he says, you know, you said some awful mean things about people who are really good people. He said, son, you're better than that. I think you're a good writer, but you have to take care of people. You can't just hurt people like that. And it was the first time a man had told me, gave me some direction, and it was the craziest thing. I started crying, and he held me for like a minute, and it must have been the weirdest interview of his life. But he helped me, and I started thinking about all these people in sports that had raised me. There was a great writer named Jim Murray in the LA Times, and he raised me. He taught me what was right. Like, no matter, people would always come up to try to meet him, and he'd get up and he'd shake their hand. And by the end of the meeting, that guy, the third string tennis writer from the Bakersfield Gazette, would think he was the star and Murray was the scrub. It was just, like, I always think of Elway. He's my friend, but he's just the most straight up guy. I mean, all those pianos kept falling on his head over and over, right? And he never blamed anybody. He didn't blame his 3 little midget receivers. He never had a single decent lineman all those years. And it was always, it's my fault, we'll do better next year. He was just responsible, you know? And I never, to this day, have seen him turn away a photo or an autograph. One time I have this nephew. His dad was the biggest Elway fan. He died of alcohol poisoning. They buried him in an Elway jersey. So I brought him and I introduced him. It was a Sunday at Elway's. And Elway's like, oh, good to meet you. And I kind of whispered to John what the deal was. And he goes, hey, why don't you come to the game? And this little 11-year-old kid from an Indian reservation in Montana, who'd never even been to the big city, is coming to the game with John Elway, sat in John Elway's box. Then he comes back, hey, you're not leaving now, come back for dinner. Sits next to Elway. Elway cuts his meat for him. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden we don't see the kid. And a woman comes up to our table and says, does anybody know the 11-year-old kid who's crying in the bathroom? He's talking to his mother and saying, this is the greatest day of my life. And John Elway didn't have to do that. So I started writing about guys who do the right thing that I didn't really understand until I met. You ever heard of a guy named Dick Hoyt? Rick and Dick Hoyt. So this guy, Dick Hoyt, was 51 years old. His son had cerebral palsy, and he had never spoken. And then some scientists came up with a device through puffing on a straw could allow him to say something. And this kid said, I want to go for a run. Well, Dick Hoyt was a 2-pack-a-day smoker. He'd never been on a run in his life. So he starts taking the kid for runs in his wheelchair. And he can barely make it around the block. But pretty soon he starts building a better wheelchair. And he starts getting in better shape. And pretty soon they're going miles. And every time the kid would type, when he was 30 years old, he would type, that was fun, let's do it again. And pretty soon they start entering marathons. And pretty soon he rigs up a bike so they can ride bike races. And then he starts getting in triathlons. They entered the Hawaiian Ultra Triathlon, and they finished in the middle of the pack. He's swimming with this kid behind him on a raft, being pulled by a rope. And, you know, you're getting passed by a guy with towing his kid with a raft. I mean, it had to be totally humiliating. But Dick Hoyt is just one of my heroes. Did you ever know, hear the story of this kid that ran cross country in South Carolina, and he had, something was wrong, he couldn't move his right side of his arm, his body. And so he kept falling on his face and scarring his face. And the coach said, you got to quit the team. He said, I can't quit the team. My teammates need me. And so he kept running. He'd always finish in like 63 minutes. And his teammates would finish in 17, 18, 19, 20 minutes. And they got tired of waiting for him. And so the coach, this great man, he said, you know what you could do? You could run out there with him and run back. And so the guys on the team started doing this. And of course, cross country, you can't touch the guy. So they would run next to him to support him, to say, we're there for you because you didn't quit on us. And pretty soon, the girls started doing it. And then pretty soon, at the end of races, other teams started doing it. And then pretty soon, for the final league championship, all the cheerleaders, all the men, all the boys teams, all the girls teams ran with this kid, Ben Coleman. And they said the parents were just crying at the finish line. It's all because that coach stepped up and did something right. And I wrote this column, I remember, and I got this email from Kevin Costner, and he said, I love that story, it made me cry, and I want you to know that I'm going to pay for his education no matter how far he goes. And the great thing is Ben Coleman is now a doctor. It's like we just stuck it to Kevin Costner so hard. I started loving stories like that. You know, when people say, oh, you could, you know, sports, what is sports? I'll never forget, and I never forget, in 9/11, that plane that was headed back, they said they were going to smash it into the U.S. Capitol. And it was 4 athletes who came up with a plan. Terrible pressure, people terrified. But who came up with the plan? 4 athletes, and they worked it out, and they executed the plan, right? They barged into they smashed down the door, they fought these guys, and the plane crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And my niece was working in the Capitol that day. So whenever people tell you sports is better, that you're better than sports, like my professor, sports is the best thing we got going, I think. I mean, sports is woven into our fabric of our lives. Never be ashamed of sports. Never be ashamed you still wear, you know, your college or your high school baseball shirt that's 2 sizes too small. Never be ashamed that you're still a Cleveland Browns fan, even though wins it. Because it's not that you're a Browns fan because your dad was a fan and your grandfather was a fan. That's what bonds us together as men and women too. But I always will be honored and privileged to have been raised and to know these great men of sports. No matter what you hear, 99% of these guys are dedicated and responsible and loyal. And it was my privilege to be a part of it. And that's why I'm so glad to see we all gather once a year as men to try to do the right thing. You know, it's just, I don't know, it gives me chills. That's why I'm so happy to be here. And I would like to say, if anybody sees that professor, could you tell her for me? Thank you guys so much. Wow. Rick Reilly, everybody.